Hello friends, welcome back to Discussion Movies. Today I will show you a 2015 American sci-fi, adventure, fantasy movie titled The Martian. Friends, please subscribe the channel and enjoy the movie story. Watch out and take care. In the first scene on Sol 18 mission day, the Ares 3 crew is busy with their mission. On the touchdown web page, Mark Watney, being the resident botanist, collects a few samples on the website for chemo evaluation, whilst the relaxation go round with their respective duties. Mark chit-chats over the radio with Martinez, the one in cost of their flight, who's fiddling with the MAV with others listening in and commenting on Mark's small speak returned at the HAB. Johansson in cost of the crew manipulate Core and Beck the team. Doctor are additionally busy with work. Johansson suggests to the captain to reduce Mark's reception off the radio, considering he was talking continuous of path. The commander offers the order and he is reduced. Shut nearly straight away. There is an emergency mission update and Johansson informs the crew about a storm drawing close them. The captain asks to comprehend how awful the storm was, and Johansson informs her that it would be detrimental to the meth. As each person returns to the HAB to see what was going on, they observed that the storm had escalated and they wanted to take speedy motion. Vojo, the group physicist, and Mark recommend ready until the storm comes. Then again Commander Lewis offers orders to abort the mission when the storm proved to be detrimental. Their math Martinez leaves to prepare the ship for its launch earlier than the math suggestions. Off due to the sturdy wind, they all put on their EVA swimsuit and head out with Mark in the back of them, closing the HAB as the crew struggle through the storm to get to the MAV. Their satellite TV for PC conversation dish receives blown off. These beforehand are capable to avert it from hitting them. Alternatively, Mark receives hit by way of it and is blown away by means of the storm. Everyone's in shock and their efforts to hear from Mark are futile when you consider that they lost indicators from him. The commander orders the teammates to return to the ship whilst she searches for Mark, hoping to get a sign from his swimsuit. Martinez informs her that the MAV was tipping off and would not maintain any longer in the wind. Then again she tells him to launch besides her. When it does, Beck breaks a harsh actuality to her that Mark was once eradicated, considering that he would not continue to exist such a storm. Commander Lewis, however, returns to the ship on account that there used to be no signal of Mark. She offers Martinez orders to launch earlier than their MAV suggestions off shooting out of Mars, except Mark. In the meantime, again on Earth, NASA breaks the information to the public about aborting the Ares 3 mission to Mars when the NASA satellites detected a storm drawing near their mission. Website. He commends Commander Lewis's rapid motion on evacuating all group participants to the ship Hermes earlier than any. In addition, injury was once carried out to the MAF. Following that, he breaks the unhappy information of Mark Watney's dying to the press newshounds, inflicting a ruckus for further questions. Now lower back on Mars, particularly Watney had survived the hit and he gasps for air upon regaining consciousness. With a necessary oxygen stage, he manages to pull himself out of the heap of sand, panting in ache as he tries to pull out a skinny steel that punctured his EVA go well with deep into his belly. He then returns to the HAB to have a tendency to his wound. He endures the ache through the procedure. As he shortly pulls out the rod from his belly, he cuts off his swimsuit from his physique and cautiously takes out the remnant of the rod from his belly, after which he stitches it. He now not solely grunts in ache from his damage, however is frustrated as he has been left stranded on a peculiar planet. Later on, Mark logs into the HAB journal and enters the log for Sol 19A. Recording that he is alive, he explains that his blood and the antenna that pierced him had created a bridge on his suit which stored him alive. He files that he did not die on Sol 18, understanding it would come as a shock or as an alternative a shock to his crew, NASA, and the world at Massive. He has no way of speaking with NASA or his crew, and lamentably it'll take 4 years for any other manned mission to attain him. He is caught in a HAB that is designed to closing for solely 31 days. He explains that if he miraculously would not die of thirst or lack oxygen, he'd sooner or later run out of meal supplies. Mark sits ready and questioning of methods to live to tell the tale and additionally signed to Earth. On the other hand, nothing appears to come to thought it must have been not possible to belly the reality that he was once stranded on a planet, the place no one without him. He goes about arranging stuff round the HAB, after which he takes a relaxation. He guarantees to continue to be alive to himself on Sol 21. Mark grunts in ache as he wakes up from sleep. He walks in the direction of a desk and locations his hand on them, questioning of what to do next. He opens up a few cupboards and takes out meals elements. He starts off evolved to ration them whilst ingesting, after which he uses the lavatory on vac, flushing his feces, and thinking settles in as he hears the desktop freeze dry and seal his waste. He immediately goes lower back to the kitchen to take out the complete potatoes they'd store for Thanksgiving. He exclaims in exhilaration as he goes to enter the log for Sol 21. He information that he has rationed the meals elements to ultimate him for 400 sols. He comes up with an idea To develop the entire potatoes to ultimate him 3 years, and that too on a planet the place nothing grows. Later on he takes out a few sealed feces from the natural waste storage to use as compost for his plant he strikes the photovoltaic plates from. Their unique role making it face the sun at once he dusts it off, permitting it to lure adequate power from the solar. He stacks some soil samples they'd introduced from Earth into a cart, recording each bit of his action. Afterward he treats his nonetheless bleeding harm on Sol 24. Mark takes some sealed faces from the natural waste and shops it in a container he units up 2 enclosed tents connected to the mission rover. The use of some tarpaulin he packs Martian soil outdoor the hab, pouring it onto the flooring of the tent. He takes a break later on, consuming a grain juice after doing an undertaking that used to be well worth many fingers. On Sol 31 he makes strains across the already unfold Martian soil in the tent as ridges. He cuts open the sealed feces and he additionally provides some earth soil, after which he mixes it with some liquid protecting his nostril from the stench. He slices the entire potatoes into halves and rapidly later on he takes the compost alongside the potatoes and buries it. He makes use of the grain juice as water after overlaying it up. On Sol 36 Mark entertains himself with Commander Lewis's 80s tune series. He ponders on how to get sufficient water to farm the massive rectangular meter he created, with every cubic wanting 40 liters of water to farm. Luckily he is educated about the recipe, being that he solely wants to get oxygen to burn with hydrogen to produce water. Mark fills a cylinder with sufficient hydrogen from the math. He additionally makes use of a radium catalyst to assist separate the oxygen from the carbon dioxide in the MAV gas plant. He narrates the total manner and additionally how unsafe his plans would show to be. Whilst coming into the log for that noticed, he carves out some timber for Martinez's crucifix to assist make furnace. He goes to mattress with the crucifix, hoping and counting on it to work out. The subsequent noticed he makes use of the timber chips to make hearth. As soon as it catches furnace he locations it on the valve related to the hydrogen cylinder. He rejoices when he starts off evolve to see a few drops of water. Alternatively he blows himself in the tent up when the lingering oxygen bursts into flames. Saw 37 log entry. He sits in the front of the cam with an injured face and his ear nevertheless ringing from the explosion. He'd not accounted for the extra oxygen the radium valve would be setting apart from the carbon dioxide he'd been exhaling, thereby inflicting an explosion because extra oxygen blended with hydrogen used to be exceptionally inflammable. Later on he places on his EVA helmet with a radioactive swimsuit as he marches towards the water plant. He repeats the preceding steps he'd taken while placing up the water plant. Then again it would not blow off this time. Mark wipes his palms on the water produced on the walls of the tent as the water spreads over the soil. He tests in on the whole thing many times and he additionally adjusts the solar panels. Backyard the hap he makes some repairs to his EVA helmet, and on Sol 54 he notices a little sprout of the plant interior the tent when he passes via with his plate of meals. He then goes over to say hi there to the little plant returned on Earth. Teddy Sanders, the director of NASA, offers a speech at Mark's memorial carrier in Johnson's area middle at Houston. NASA's director of Mars mission Mr. Vincent Kapoor meets with Teddy Sanders after Mark's memorial carrier to discuss every other mission. He asks Teddy to authorize his satellite TV for PC time in view that 5 Ares missions had been wholly funded. They should get Congress to authorize a 6th. He explains that they utilized masses of substances the Ares 3 mission had left in the backup to fund the Ares 6 mission. Teddy at once disagrees with him, telling him that he wasn't the only one in want of satellite TV for PC time. Teddy explains that on account that they had been a public physique he would not prefer to exhibit pictures of Watney's physique in all places. Launching any other mission right away after the loss of an astronaut would be unpleasant to the public. Vincent then tells him that Mark's physique would not decompose. However, Teddy explains that the meteorologists expect his physique to be included up by means of sand inside a year. Vincent then proposes to him that they ought to categorical their sympathy to the Watney's household by way of bringing Mark's physique return to Earth on the Ares 6th mission. He explains that they would put it to be a section of the mission's cause and they would get greater help from Congress. On the other hand, ready a year would not gain them. Meanwhile, at the mission Manipulate Core, Mindy Park receives a satellite TV for PC document round 130 m. Upon having access to it, she's surprised and a bit pressured as she notices an exchange at the Ares 3 touchdown website. Online she compares the landing site satellite TV for PC time image of Sol 18 and 54 a couple of instances, after which she right away places a name through to them security asking for an emergency contact fervency record. Vincent and Teddy alongside Annie arrive to confirm Mindy's file. Vincent is satisfied that Mark is alive. He zooms in to exhibit them the easy panels alongside the rover that had been moved when you consider that Commander Lewis had plugged it to cost on notice 17. On the other hand, Teddy argues that the wind might have cleaned the solar panels, and Annie suggests they name Commander Lewis on Capcom to affirm the function of the rover. Teddy right away cuts in, telling her that if there may be opportunity that Watney's alive, informing the Ares 3 crew would be a terrible thought. He explains that the Ares 3 crew had 10 extra months to return to Earth and they wanted to be focused. Facet House tour used to be risky. He tells her that information would distract them, and Vincent is of the same opinion with Teddy, since informing the crew would make them devastated for leaving Mark in the back of. Annie is even greater disturbed at what they would say to the public than telling the crew about Mark. She concerns over what the public would throw at them for leaving Mark at the back of. Legally they are to release the satellite TV for PC images inside 24 hours, so Teddy tells them to launch to provide an announcement alongside the pictures to the press. In accordance to Teddy's calculations, Mark would likely be put to everlasting relaxation from Ravenous before they can assist him. Vincent starts to fear over what Mark have to be going through. Nearly at once the scene switches to Mark dancing out of the bathe to one of Commander Lewis's 80s songs. Director Teddy Sanders addresses the press concerning the satellite TV for PC photos proving that Watney used to be alive. His information reasons a stir as predicted, with loads of questions rolling in from the press. Now lower back on Mars, whilst getting into the Notice 70 log, Watney tells us that he has to start wondering lengthy time period. The subsequent Ares mission to arrive will be Ares 4, and its touchdown website online would be 100 kilometers away from him. He starts to map out the touchdown website earlier than the Ares 4 arrives. In 4 years he needs to be at the web page. He stacks some batteries at the again of the rover, after which he explains that the rover he'd used to tour around Mars can solely manage 35 kilometers at the most earlier than its battery dies, in which he'll need to recharge at the hab in a while. He goes in advance to discuss about his second hassle. The ride will take him 50 days and he'll have to stay in a rover with existence guide like that of a small van. His solely choice is to do some science to work it out, after which he maps out a spot on his map. The next scene suggests him in a rover on Notice 74. Riding away from the hat, he nearly dozes off whilst riding, however he right now snaps out of it later into a freezing night. Mark explains that he had efficaciously doubled his battery lifestyles. On the other hand, he cannot use the heater to warm himself up, given that it would imply that his battery lifestyles would not final. Sadly, if he does not use the heater he could freeze to everlasting relaxation, so he calls off the trip to discover an answer for a heater. The subsequent noticed Mark solves his heating trouble by way of digging up a radioisotope thermoelectric generator to connect it to the rover. Even though using the RTG proves to be risky to people, he solely has to be careful so he does not smash it. He pulls out the buried RTG and attaches it to the rover. He wraps it up with foil, after which he returns to his seat to proceed his trip. Log entry by astronaut Watney on Sol 76. Mark rejoices over his success in discovering an answer to his heating trouble. He plays the Soli disco track he'd located in Commander Lewis's file, dancing whilst playing his trip. In the meantime, again on Earth, Watney's each motion has been monitored with the aid of NASA throughout a press assembly about the new satellite TV for PC snapshots. One of the journalists asks Vincent about Mark's vacation spot. He explains to them that Mark was once taking the rover out for longer trips due to the fact he was once getting ready for a lengthy ride. Every other query comes in as to why Mark would depart a secure vicinity for somewhere hazardous. Vincent then explains that they suspect he needs to go to the touchdown website of Ares 4 to try to make contact with. Then again, if they should talk with him, they'd ask him to continue to be put on the grounds that they have been working on methods to deliver him domestic alive. Upon hearing him, Annie offers him a speedy stare, after which they exit the assembly straight away. In the meantime, Teddy, alongside others in a convention room, watches Vincent's speech to the press on television. Vincent and Annie head to the conference room after the assembly. Upon attaining the convention room, she asks him no longer to point out bringing Mark domestic alive during a speech anymore. She explains that pronouncing such would solely make human beings fear that Mark would possibly be eradicated on Mars. Teddy Sanders at once cuts in as they enter, telling Vincent no longer to point out bringing Mark domestic alive anymore. Vincent tells him that he used to be simply making an attempt to be superb. Teddy goes via a few reviews and he is taken aback to see that Mark had traveled 76 kilometers, notwithstanding the most battery existence of their rover. He then asks Mindy about it, and she explains to him that Mark drives for 2 hours and then does a brief EVA. She assumes he would possibly have used the time to alternate batteries. Teddy then asks if he changed his oxygenator or executed any different aspect for the duration of the EVA. Destroy Mindy then goes in addition to give an explanation for that each and every 41 hours there may be a 17 minutes hold due to the way the orbit works, and it was possible they'd neglected something. Teddy then offers her full authority over the satellite TV for PC trajectory orbital adjustments. He asks her to decrease the hold to 4 minutes so that they can seize the entirety barring lacking any detail. Bincy returns to her seat after receiving he was once accomplished with her. Teddy goes in advance to speak about Mark's movement. To the Ares 4 website he is aware of that Mark is clever adequate to comprehend that going to the website online is his solely hazard. He then asks Brucing the director of her manufacturing laboratories over a video name about the earliest it would take for pre-supplies. To attain the Ares 4 site assuming Mark reaches the website, Bruce then tells him that with the function of the Earth and Mars it would take a complete of 9 months with 6 months for constructing it. Teddy without delay cuts into his explanation telling him to make it prepared in 3 months. The JPL crew exclaimed on account that it used to be not possible to put together such supplies inside 3 months. Teddy then threatens him with making a file on the JPL's constructing skills and by his calculations the extra time devoted to the work would be a nightmare. Bruce would not have to do the math to understand how draining the time beyond regulation would be. Teddy tells him that he'd fund him the cash so they have to get to work simply then. Mitch Henderson, the Hermes director of flight, brings up the difficulty of informing the crew about Mark. Vincent tells him that they'd already mentioned it. Then again Mitch is bent on telling the crew given that he decides on what's excellent for them he feels that the crew deserves to be aware of about Mark. Teddy then tells him that they can solely inform them as soon as there is a diagram to rescue Mark for the reason that Bruce has 3 months to come up with the pre-supply. They'd inform them solely after 3 months with Bruce announcing they'd do their nice at JPL. Upon listening to him Teddy cuts him in announcing Mark dies if he would not lower back on Mars. Mark cultivates his potatoes after 48 saws and they grew even higher than he'd predicted. He cautiously uproots them after which he continues the plant to in addition use it. Log Entry 79 He has now come to be the first one to develop wholesome potatoes on the Martian soil. On the other hand his achievements wouldn't matter if he does not parent out a way to speak with NASA. He zooms in on a map when used to be searching at it and then he picks on a spot announcing he is aware of what to do. He rides on the rover to the equal spot on the map. In the meantime Mindy informs Vincent about Mark's motion and he is pressured about the place he used to be headed for the reason that he hadn't taken the direction for over 13 days. He used to be additionally now not headed to the Ares 4 and wasn't taking a straight route, so it receives Vincent questioning. Mindy suggests he would possibly be attempting to keep away from some barriers on his way. Alternatively Vincent tells her that there was once nothing out there without pausing barring completing his declaration. Mindy asks to entire his assertion, however he right away requests for a map. He rushes into one of their workspaces taking down a Mars map from a wall with one of the people questioning. He apologizes and borrows a marker and ruler from one of them. He traces the Hab and Mark's present-day region to a viable vacation spot. Vincent immediately catches on to the place Mark used to be headed and Mindy's mouth falls open in shock. Vincent leaves to get on an airplane. Meanwhile on Mars Mark arrives at his vacation spot and nearly without delay the scene switches, return to Vincent arriving at the JPL in California. Bruce welcomes Vincent and they head to his workspace. Whilst Bruce introduces Vincent to his people, Mark stumbles upon something on the Mars and he starts off evolved to pull out something from the sand, leading him to every other machine buried in the sand. In the meantime Vincent asks to see the reproduction of what Mark used to be digging up. He finally uncovers a gadget he and Vincent name the Pathfinder. Mark opens it up and attaches it to his rover on Sol 109. Mark boards it at the Hab. He units it up after taking some cables and battery from the Hab, and the crew on Earth set up theirs as properly ready for the sign after radio. Whilst they take a look at line ultimately turns on and right away the JPL acquire a sign to their very own check line. With Vincent rejoicing they provoke the digicam on the check line and at the same time the digicam on Mark's aspect is additionally initiated after radio. Whilst Mark rushes into the Hab he takes out 3 small whiteboards asking if they should examine him right away. The JPL receives his photo and Vincent right now asks the man in cost to factor the digicam at sure earlier than he does, so he implies that the verbal exchange technique wasn't exactly a desirable one on the grounds that they ought to solely reply Mark's questions barring being capable to bring their very own messages to him. Of course they comprehend that properly, however Vincent simply asks him to factor the digital camera considering they ought to cope with the rest later. The guy points to the digicam letting Mark recognize they may want to study him. Mark right away jumps for pleasure as he receives the message. Mark figures he may want to use the digital camera as it is to get extra technical conversations. He goes via his colleague's stuff and takes out Johansson's laptop computer. He sends a chart with alphanumeric devices from the laptop computer to his. He then goes beforehand and makes a large circumference round the digicam after he marks round the circumference with a foot lengthy every. He then locations some white boards with numbers on it with every representing an alphabet. The JPL trap onto what he used to be getting it and they immediately set up the equal thing at their workspace. After a whilst they're able to ship a message to Mark using the pointer on the digital camera to relay their message. Immediately after Mark receives it, he returns to the hab and translates the message in accordance to the charts. The JPL asks Mark how he's alive and he responds with his reply on a whiteboard. For them to capture it through the camera no longer quite lengthy. The JPL receives his response and Bruce wakes up dozing. Vincent to see Mark's reply. The conversations between Mark and NASA progress. The specialists in NASA instruct him on how to hack the rover operating gadget into allowing the Pathfinder to speak with it. He follows the instructions and NASA is able to hyperlink the rover to the Pathfinder to allow a broadcast, barring having to use pictures. In NASA's control room, everybody gathers around staring at the message broadcast as Vincent at JPL communicates with Mark. He sends a heartwarming message to Mark letting him know they've been gazing him from Psalm 54 and are rooting for him. He informs him that they'd be sending some pre-supplies for him to continue to exist before the Ares 4 arrive with everyone emotional watching the messages. Mark's is no much less emotional and glad to hear from them. Mark replies to them, saying he is really searching forward to no longer being put to eternal relaxation. As usual, he receives everyone laughing properly. The mood switches to an uncomfortable one when Mark asks what the crew had said when they knew he used to be alive. Bruce asks his workers to give him and Vincent a little house. Bruce then asks Vincent if it was proper to tell him the fact and Vincent nods, typing his reply. He informs Mark that they hadn't told the crew simply yet for the reason that they needed to focal point on their mission. Upon receiving it, Mark freaks out, sending his replies with the F word. He gets all and sundry laughing and Vincent makes him know that his messages had been broadcasted live and global so that he could be cautious of his contact. Upon receiving the message, Mark is surprised, however his humor would not cease. He receives everyone chuckling but again at his message, barring Teddy Sanders, and Vincent tries comprehending what he'd sent. The subsequent scene shows Teddy Sanders receiving a name as he walks into the office. The place Mitch and Annie were ready. After he drops the call, he informs them that he was on a name with the President of the United States, trying to provide an explanation for Mark's last message. Mitch then tells the director that it was once time to tell the crew the reality since they could not keep them in the darkish anymore. He explains that whatever Mark had stated was right, and the crew wished to know the reality to be at ease. Teddy then asks him if he was solely bringing it up since Vincent was away. On the other hand, Mitch tells him that he doesn't have to wait for Vincent to figure out what the crew really wishes. The next scene shows the Hermes in-house, and it's been 4 months since their departure from Mars. Commander Louis stands at a window in the ship staring into house. Not quite long, Johansson calls for her and she goes down to the control room. She meets Martinez, who's in a hurry to take a look at something, and when Commander Lewis asks him, he tells her that his son had become 3 and his wife had dispatched some birthday pictures for him to see. The duo goes down to the control room to meet with the others. While Johansson goes through some messages, a new video without delay comes in, meant for the entire crew. She informs them and they gather round to watch it. In the video, Mitch reveals the truth about Mark to the crew. He offers them reasons why they hadn't knowledgeable them earlier. The message comes as a shocker to them, and Commander Lewis starts off evolved to blame herself for leaving Mark behind. When they attempt comforting her, she tells them that they were simply following her orders, implying that she was accountable for leaving Mark behind on Sol 128. Mark sets up a digital camera on his potato farm, recording everything he does. He explains that due to the fact that there was no communication with NASA, each person was now fascinated in his activities. He talks about he has been receiving lots of emails and how his alma mater had dispatched him some tips for his farm. They'd additionally told him that he'd colonize Mars, given that he was the first to plant on the Martian. He calls himself the exceptional botanist, and he also talks about the message he'd acquired from NASA asking him for a photograph on his subsequent transmission. Afterward, he starts off evolved practicing how he posed for the picture. Although no longer sure of the proper pose, the next scene indicates him uncovering the Pathfinder and standing for a picture in front of its digicam at NASA. Annie is a bit annoyed to see Mark in a house suit in the photograph since she wanted the world to see his face. Vincent explains to her over a video call that taking his house suit would suggest that he'd be put to eternal relaxation. Vincent's reply to Annie gets all and sundry chuckling. Shortly later on, Teddy announces that they'd be sending the pre-supplies to Mark in a 12 months, with the traveling time being inside 9 months. They talk about how much Mark has to survive earlier than the arrival of the pre-supply. Vincent informs him that the botanist reports that Mark has been doing an excellent job so far and his meals would last him until Sol 912. Teddy urges Bruce to make everything geared up for the pre-supply. As he walks away, he mutters that everything would be all proper if only nothing takes place. Almost immediately, the scene switches to the place Mark accidentally blows off the hab with the explosion, flinging him and the hab Away his oxygen degree gets crucial and he manages to use tape to seal the cracks on his helmet before he suffocate. He walks toward the plant tent only to locate all his plants burned to ashes. He returns to the rover and freaks out in annoyance in view that all his efforts had been burned down. Everyone acquired sad information about the crops. Vincent explains that the plants had died since they had been exposed to Mars surroundings. According to their calculations, Mark may not survive Sol 600 since all his meals would only final him to Sol 458. He additionally can't plant anymore since the potatoes he had could not be cultivated. NASA now has a change of design and they need to send supplies to Mark earlier than their actual time, alternatively of the time they'd agreed to launch the pre-supplies to Mars. Teddy gives the team 47 days to get everything prepared. He instructs Mark to inform Bruce of the change of plans upon receiving the message. Bruce walks away to get modified, knowing it would not be an easy assignment. Meanwhile, the crew is in a position to communicate with Mark, and Martinez sends messages to him with the crew laughing at the conversation. He then tells Martinez that he'd by chance blown up the hab, however Commander Lewis's tune survived. He tells Martinez to say hello to the crew, smiling from the heartwarming conversation with Martinez. The subsequent saw he returns to the website online and clears out the dead flora from the hab. He uses the tarpaulin to cowl up the entrance of the hab, after which he stabilizes the pressure in the hab and seals off some air holes. Later on he attracts out his potatoes and begins to count them. Now again at the JPL, a guy walks to an workplace where he wakes a snoozing Rich Purnell and Astrodynamics. Up from sleep, Wealthy behaves in a rather careworn manner, spewing the coffee he sipped into a basket. His boss asks about how rapidly a jet could be launched to Mars from Earth. Wealthy begins to give an explanation to him, however he pauses when an idea settles into his head. He maintains his boss in suspense as he walks clumsily towards the kitchen to get every other coffee. He returns to his seat to return to work, except letting it out with his boss still ready for him to complete his sentences. His boss walks away gently, asking him if he realizes that he is his boss, and Rich acts no exclusive, nodding his reply to the questions as though it meant nothing. In the meantime, the JPL sends in the bill for making the probe to Teddy. Teddy is a bit taken aback by the consignment and he asks Bruce over a video call about it to verify the amount. Teddy then asks Bruce about how lengthy it would take for the probe to be ready, and Bruce tells him it would take 15 days for it to be equipped. After a few suggestions and arguments, Teddy manages to agree on a lesser time with Bruce. He guidelines out the inspection of the probe to accelerate the launch time. He asks him to inform Mark to stretch his ration to 4 extra days before the probe arrives as instructed. Mark rations his meals for 4 extra days, although the selection was draining. In the meantime, on Earth, everyone's busy with the pre-supply set up for Mark in a workspace. Rich's boss talks about how they'd adjust some satellite movement in view that they'd been able to push the launch of the probe beforehand than it should be. After some of them ask what Wealthy has been doing about the situation, he dashes off to look for him. Upon seeing him, he asks how some distance he'd gone with his calculations, and Wealthy asks him for more time. The subsequent scene shows all and sundry in NASA watching the launch of the probe and their respective teams. Those at JPL all tensed watch the launching of the probe, with NASA getting ready to launch it at their control center. However, they have a good time when the probe seems to have been correctly launched. Unfortunately, it faces a little malfunction and the launching fails. Anyone is heartbroken from what happened. Vincent receives a message from Mark asking how the launch went. He relays the unhappy news to him. Mark sits staring at the vast horizons as the scene switches to the place he'd sent a message to the crew asking them to relay a message to his mother and father. He tells them to let his parents know that he preferred his work to make them feel sturdy. He sent these messages probably questioning he'd starve to eternal relaxation. Now at the China National House Administration, Zhu Tao, deputy chief scientist of CNSA, watches the news on NASA's failure to launch their probe. The chief of scientist CNSA, Gudming, additionally watches alongside her. During the interview with Vincent and Teddy on TV, they discovered that they'd skipped inspecting the probe so that they could speed up the launch time. Fred Ming immediately switches the television off, saying that the NAS astronaut on Mars would be put to everlasting rest by way of the way things had been going. Just then Jiutao tells him that there was once still any other way for him to survive. She explains that their engineers had accomplished the calculations and the Tianshang booster had enough gas to launch to Mars. Gudming then asks why NASA hadn't contacted them for help. Now getting up from a seat, and Zhu explains to him that NASA is unaware. She explains that by helping them, the world would comprehend of their contribution and NASA would also assist them in time of need. Then again, it had cost them to provide up a booster and cancel the Tianshang completely. He then tells her that the be counted should be stored between the scientists. There's good news for everybody, with Teddy receiving a call from the CNSA. Additionally, at the Pleiades NASA advanced supercomputer, Wealthy finally Gets his calculations right, he takes a flight over to NASA. Searching all shabby, upon arriving he heads straight to Vincent's office, asking Vincent to drop his name so he could speak. Vincent's even more careworn as to who he was then, having the audacity to inform him to hang up his name. However, Prosperous introduces himself and gets straight to business. Not lengthy, and he walks into an office, the place she meets Teddy, Mitch, Vincent, and of course Prosperous. As Annie arrives for the meeting, she asks why the mission had a strange identify on its invitation, and Teddy explains that it's a secret assembly only within themselves. After a little small talk, she asks about who Prosperous is, and Vincent introduces him to her. After the introduction, Vincent asks him to repeat everything he advised him to everyone. He then uses Annie and Teddy for demonstration. According to him, he'd completed the calculations and his plans will be successful. He proposes that the Hermes change their route towards Mars, and the Taeyong would supply them with enough resources before they head toward Mars. Meanwhile, Mark would intercept himself from Mars. The usage of the math, the crew would rescue him, and everyone returns domestic. Bruce and Rich's boss seems to agree with him on account that it was the first-class idea, so a long way. However, Teddy sends him out. Teddy then asks the members if Wealthy was proper, and of course he was once. However, they'd be including an extra 500 days to the crew's mission there. Caught between losing a total crew or one astronaut there to either ship the Taeyong to Mark or send it to the crew to final them the extra days whilst they rescue Mark. When Bruce asks how they'd make the decision, Vincent implies that Teddy would be the solely one to decide. On the other hand, Mitch suggests they tell the crew about it due to the fact that it was proper for them to make the decision. Teddy cuts him and telling him they'd go with their preliminary plan of sending the Taeyong to Mark till the Ares 4 mission is launched. Mitch walks away aggravated by their choice. Back on Hermes, Vogel goes to have a little speak with Johansson while she works out at the health club. He tells her that he'd received a message from his household and she takes him to check it out on their gadget. Upon accessing it, she notices a message coming. Rich Punnell had dispatched the analysis of the rescue mission to the crew. However, NASA's disagreement. The crew sits to discuss the scenario with Commander Lewis, telling them she would stick to the plan if it had been to be up to her. However, NASA strongly disagrees with the graph, and each of them has to assume about the consequences earlier than anything else. Martinez does not even give her a chance to entire her statement when he votes to go beforehand with the plan. Lewis asks him to calm down and assume it through, explaining that they might now not be sent to Area for some time after embarking on the plan. Alternatively, Johansson does her calculations and tells the crew that the mission would be possible and she should do it. Martinez votes to go through with the rescue plan alongside everybody. Meanwhile, lower back on Earth, the NASA control room receives the message from Hermes. They inform them about Wealthy Punnels and that they'd be changing the route of their mission. It gets everyone wondering, and one of the people asks to check if the purpose of their change of path was due to a malfunction of the Hermes. The man is even extra perplexed at who Wealthy Purnell is, so he asks Mindy about it. She tells him that she had no idea since the assembly with Rich used to be only inside the board of directors. He then yells, asking anybody to find out about Wealthy Purnell in a team assembly with Mitch. Teddy discusses the maneuver Rich had dispatched to Hermes with. He suspects Mitch had something to do with it, so he talks about how a single existence wasn't more vital than the purpose of their mission. Mitch cuts him in, telling him that no lifestyles was much less important. On the other hand, Teddy tells him that he'd be expecting his resignation when the dust settles, telling him to carry their astronauts home. Sol 219 log entry. Mark talks about how he'd be the usage of the MAV that's already at the Ares for Skya Pirelli crater to go into orbit. By means of doing so, the crew would catch him in space as the Hermes passes with the aid of the Mars orbit. However, to experience to the Schiaparelli crater on the Ares 4 landing site, he has to raise along the entirety that he'll need to live to tell the tale with him. Unfortunately, the rover used to be too small to handle it. However, the experts in NASA recommended him on what to do. In the next scene, he drills open the roof of his rover as steered. While doing so, the crew members lower back on Earth do the same element on a similar rover. NASA meets with the Kinsa formally to commence with the Taeyong launch to Hermes. Meanwhile, Mark packs up, writing goodbye messages on some stuff in the hab and also rationing the meal supplies he'll be desiring. Also in lower back on Hermes, the crew has quality time catching up with their cherished ones over video calls. The JPL alongside Mark on Mars prepare their respective rovers. Mark attaches an air sac at the open roof of the rover, after which he inflates it. The JPL team also inflates the air balloon on their rover, however it blows off. However, Mark's very own was best since he'd used straps to maintain it together. Down, the crew members alongside the NASA group meet at the Kinsa control room for the Taeyong launch. They all watch the Taeyong booster being launched to the Hermes. Mitch offers Teddy a quick look while anybody else in the control room rejoices over the success of the probe launch at the Hermes. The Tianxing arrives with their elements met goes down to the Hermes exit to see where the probe will be connected while Martinez handles the controls. Martinez directs the probe gently to the Hermes exit and they successfully mount it to their ship. It is after 7 months and on Sol 461 the scene shows Mark coming out of the bathe looking emaciated with a few scars on his physique and with overgrown beards. He shuts down the NASA system in the hab, after which he heads out of the hat. He enters the rover and proceeds for a experience. Mark takes a little walk, after which he feeds the solar panels and sleeps under the rover for a whilst he talks about how strange it feels to be the first to do something or reach anywhere around Mars. Back on Earth in the NASA manipulate room, Mindy tells Vincent that Mark had been keeping to schedules they'd steered him to drive for hours, take out the photovoltaic panels to recharge, take walks and then sleep anywhere to while away time. On Sol 494 Mark drives alongside the vast horizons of the Martian, repeating each and every schedule as suggested. The next scene indicates Vincent and Mitch on a video call with Bruce, discussing what the MAV Mark would be used to intercept into Mars orbit. Mitch explains to Vincent that for the MAV to be in a position to escape the gravity on the Mars orbit they'd want to make the MAV lighter. Bruce then begins demonstrating with a MAV prototype. He takes out the seats, leaving solely one which Mark would be using and some manipulate panels. Vincent immediately cuts him and asking if he'd be shooting Mark to area using faraway controls. He then tells him to proceed with his demonstration and Bruce then removes the nostril of the MAV to attach a tarpaulin to it. Vincent's mouth falls open when Bruce starts off evolved to explain how the usage of a tarpaulin would reduce the weight of the MAV to enable it to accelerate quickly. Mark receives the message about how he'd be traveling in the MAV. His reply to the message receives Vincent in the control room, with Mindy thinking how the expression on Mark's face was when he dispatched it on Psalm 538. Mark arrives at the Ares 4 landing site after a little small discuss. While coming into the SAW 538 log he drives towards the MAV. Mark climbs into the MAV and he does the whole thing as instructed by using NASA, repeating the same technique Bruce had demonstrated to Vincent. He then attaches the tarpaulin at the pinnacle of the MAV after detaching the nose from it. Meanwhile in the Hermes the crew prepares their ship for the massive rescue. After a while the crew discusses the plan over a meal. They come to an settlement on a foolproof plan with Commander Lewis telling them that if they be successful they'll carry Mark on board. However, if they fail they'd have to go after him. On Sol 561 Mark has his meal, after which he writes a little message saying the rover had saved his existence and he exits the rover. Meanwhile on Earth everyone gathers at New York Instances Square witnessing the Ares 3 live rescue mission in the NASA manipulate room. The team members are aggravating since the crew was once about to kick off a risky design. Meanwhile Mark appears at himself in a mirror almost in disbelief at how he seemed, after which he shaves off his overgrown beards, puts on his house suit and is ready for his launch. The crowd gathers round to witness the crew's rescue attempt for Mark. Mark launches into house, however the tarpaulin on the MAV receives blown off and it results in Mark passing out whilst the MAV pulls backward with the Maven Mark floating in space. The crew tries to get him to reply, however he does not and it gets everyone worried. He sooner or later wakes up with everyone letting out a sigh of comfort. However the distance created due to the accident turns out to be farther than estimate. After some calculation Commander Lewis suggests they set off an explosive to assist increase the thrust of the Hermes. Mark over the MAV tells them that he should grab sharp objects to pierce his area suit so that he may want to speed closer to them. However Commander Lewis dismisses his thinking and she announces the new plan to NASA. Her plans stir pretty an uncomfortable reaction on account that it was volatile to launch an explosive in space. In the meantime Vojo makes the explosives using a few of their substances while Johansson assists him. Johansson then goes over to Beck handing him the explosive. She offers him a hug, kisses Eva's helmet and asks him to be careful, although telling him no longer to tell everyone the plan. Units off, however Commander Lewis decides to head out so she ought to grab Mark. As the explosive units off it pushes the Hermes a little further to Mark and Commander Lewis moves similarly to Mark with the rope on her suit connected to the Hermes. However Mark grabs a sharp object to pierce his space go well with so he could pace toward her. When she is unable to attain him, unfortunately she fails to seize him, leaving each person in suspense as Mark begins to glide away. However he grabs the rope that used to be attached to the ship, and with that Commander Lewis pulls him nearer and they successfully rescue him. The film switches to emotion as everyone on Earth and the crew jubilates on the successful rescue try, with the crew hugging him. The next scene shows Mark sipping espresso, after which he touches a little sprout of plant saying howdy to it. It's Mark's first day on Earth. After returning from the life-threatening mission he addresses some college students in a lecture room while he makes use of his experience on Mars to factor out some facts whilst teaching them. In the meantime the Ares 4 mission is set to be launched and Martinez is one of the crew members. Each crew member of the Ares 3 mission watches at their respective places the launching of the Arius 4 mission. The movie concludes with everyone jubilating on the profitable launch of the Ares 4 mission. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more movies like this. Thanks for watching.